Okay, let's dive into the story of a teenage sultan whose brutal murder didn't just end his life, it completely reshaped an empire. We're talking about Osman II, a ruler who took the throne at just 14 years old, only to meet a horrifying end at 18 that sent shockwaves through the entire Ottoman world. Just listen to those words. Those were the desperate, final pleas of an emperor. I mean, can you even picture it? An 18-year-old, stripped of everything, being dragged through the streets of his own capital, begging the crowds for pity, just hours before he was strangled to death in a fortress dungeon. It's an almost unbelievable fall from grace. So, how does this happen? How does the absolute ruler of one of the planet's most powerful empires end up so completely broken? To really get it, we need to rewind and go back to the very beginning of his short and very turbulent life. Right from the start, Osman's story wasn't one of strength. His reign began with a series of events that left him incredibly vulnerable from day one. You can see just how brief his life was. When his father, the Sultan, died, tradition said Osman should rule. But that's not what happened. Instead, powerful court factions put his mentally unstable uncle on the throne. Now, this was a huge deal, a major break from tradition, and even though Osman became sultan a few months later, he was already starting out on seriously shaky ground. He would only rule for a little over 4 years. And this was the world he inherited, the massive, powerful Ottoman Empire, with its glittering capital in Istanbul. From the Topkapi Palace, you see right there, sultans commanded armies and ruled over millions of people. For a time, it was the absolute heart of global power. But, inside those palace walls, a 14-year-old emperor is basically a sitting duck. He was dropped right into a political snake pit, and the deadliest vipers in that pit were the Janissaries. Think of them as the empire's elite soldiers, kind of like a Praetorian Guard, who had become so powerful they could literally make or break the men on the throne. But here's the thing about Osman. He wasn't just some helpless victim caught up in the chaos. No, he was a really complex, ambitious ruler, and he even had something of a secret identity. In his private life, he wasn't just Sultan Osman. He was a pretty talented poet who wrote under the pen name Farisi. It means horseman or cavalier, a name that really captures his love for horses and his bold, assertive personality. And his poetry, wow, it gives us this incredible window right into his mind. In lines like this, you can hear his sense of duty, for sure, but you can also feel his paranoia creeping in. He knew he had enemies. He could feel the ill-wishing plotters scheming for his downfall. And knowing he had enemies is exactly what pushed him to act. As a ruler, this kid was a radical. I mean, he didn't just tinker with things, he went straight after the most powerful groups in the entire empire. He planned to completely replace the Janissaries, he cut their pay, he challenged the top religious scholars, and he even shattered royal tradition by marrying freeborn noblewomen. Every single one of these moves was a direct threat to the old guard. So you can see where this is going, right? You have a bold, headstrong young sultan clashing with a powerful, entrenched military. It was a powder keg, and it was just waiting for a spark. A really dark omen came in 1621. Osman, terrified of having a rival for the throne, had his younger brother executed. Now, this was a brutal but kind of common practice at the time. This time, though, it totally backfired. The prince's dying curse horrified the public, and when a bitter winter froze the entire Bosphorus solid soon after, a lot of people saw it as a sign that God himself was angry. And here's the fatal sequence of events. It started with a frustrating military campaign that convinced Osman the Janissaries were basically useless. This cemented his secret plan. He'd announce a pilgrimage to Mecca, but just use it as a cover to go recruit a whole new, loyal army. The problem with secret plans, though, they rarely stay secret. Word got out. The Janissaries realized this wasn't a reform, it was a threat to their very existence. So they rose up, and the coup began. This was absolutely unprecedented. For more than 300 years, the Sultan himself was considered sacred, untouchable. Osman's murder completely shattered that taboo. It was a regicide, the killing of a king that would change the rules of Ottoman politics forever. For centuries, people looked at Osman's murder and saw it as the ultimate proof that a great empire was decaying from the inside out. But today, historians are offering a very different and way more interesting interpretation of what really happened. So you've got these two ways of looking at it. The old view frames this as a simple story of decline. A weak sultan and a lawless army just lead to chaos. But the newer idea asks a really provocative question. What if this wasn't just chaos? What if it was a brutal, violent, but ultimately significant step in a political evolution toward limiting the Sultan's absolute unchecked power? And the evidence for that new theory is pretty compelling. Osman's death wasn't a one-off event. Just look at this number, 6. 6 Ottoman sultans were dethroned in the 17th century alone. That's not just a string of bad luck, that's a pattern. It suggests something fundamental was changing about the rules of power. This leads to what some historians call the Second Empire theory. It suggests the Ottoman state was developing a kind of unwritten constitution. In this new system, groups like the Janissaries weren't just rebels. They were acting as a check on the Sultan's power. It's a wild idea, but it's really similar to what was happening in England around the same time, where Parliament was fighting a civil war to limit the king's power. So, let's bring it all together. What can we take away from the tragic but incredibly pivotal story of Sultan Osman II?
At its heart, it's the story of a bold young reformer, a teenage emperor, and a sensitive poet who tried to change his world. He was smart, he was determined, but in his youthful ambition, he fatally underestimated the power of the very institutions he was trying to tear down. And for that, he paid the ultimate price.
In the end, his death leaves us with this massive question about how we look at history. Was this shocking murder a symptom of a dying empire crumbling into dust? Or was it something else entirely? The violent, bloody birth of a new political reality, one where even God's shadow on earth was no longer above the law.